Hi, we're moving on in our series of God's salvation story, and we're looking at God's presence on earth. After God expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, humans could not come before God's presence. It was forbidden. They could not enter back into the Garden of Eden, and that's the story of the Bible. The story of the Bible is how do humans get back into the presence of God? During the 40 years, while Israel wandered in the wilderness, God's pillar of fire and cloud was always with them. So that's kind of like the presence of God, much more so than before. The Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to lead them on their way during the day, and a pillar of fire to give them light at night, so they could travel day or night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never left its place in front of the people. So it was always there. Sort of like the presence of God, certainly much more than ever before. At the very beginning of their escape from Egypt, the Hebrews worshipped an idol and called it the Lord. They actually called it He is Yahweh. Moses came to God to beg God to forgive the people for their sins. God was angry. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Go, leave here, you and the people you brought up from the land of Egypt to the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I will send an angel ahead of you and will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way." Well, that sounds like us, really, honestly. So when God said this, Moses went to the people, and they mourned about it. The people heard this bad news. They mourned, did not put on their jewelry. For the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I went with you for a single moment, I would destroy you. Now take off your jewelry, and I will decide what to do with you." So the Israelites remained stripped of their jewelry from Mount Horeb onward. Now, a lot of that jewelry ended up becoming a part of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Moses went back to God. Moses says, "If your presence does not go with us," Moses responded to him, "don't make us go up from here. How will it be known that I and your people have found favor in your sight unless you go with us? I and your people will be distinguished by this from all the other people on the face of the earth. God, don't make us leave without you." And God listened to Moses and agreed to go with them. Then he replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." The Lord answered Moses, "I will do this very thing you have asked, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." So God grants Moses his request. He will go with him. His presence will go with him. And then Moses says this crazy thing, the very next verse, "Please let me see your glory." Wow. So Moses is really interested in seeing, the people don't want to see his glory. They're terrified by God's glory, but Moses wants to see God as he really is. He said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim the name Yahweh before you." Remember, Yahweh means He is. That's God's actual name. "I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." But he answered, "You cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live." The Lord said, "Here is a place near me. You are to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but your face, my face, will not be seen." So this is like an enormous moment where Moses is going to see almost see the presence of God. Not quite, because when it says your back, he means you'll see my back. It just means you'll see my after effects. But wow. So God covered Moses' eyes. For anyone who looked on God's real holy presence would die. The burning bush, it's not God's real holy presence. The pillar of cloud and fire was not God's real holy presence. Every time God spoke to anyone, that was not God's real holy presence. Because anyone who is standing in the real holy presence of God and sees his glory, his holiness, they can't live. This is something we need to keep in our minds. God's presence is utterly holy and therefore utterly deadly. God, this terrifying God, had agreed for his true holy presence to go with the Hebrews all the way to the promised land. Listen to what Paul says about that holy presence. He alone is immortal. He lives in the light that no one can approach. No one has seen him. No one can ever see him. That's who the God is who passed before Moses. So when God talks about his presence going with Israel, he's talking about more than the pillar of cloud and fire. The pillar of cloud and fire would probably have gone with them, even if God had not gone with them. So even though God is in that, it's different. God is talking about his living presence, the presence that no one can see and live. That's the presence that's going to go with him. Therefore, God set up special tents to cover God's presence. We think of, the temple and the tabernacle, the tent of meeting are to reveal God's presence. It's the opposite. It's to cover it. The outer tent kept everyone out except for the priests and the Levites because all were sinners. Why did they have the outer walls of it? To keep people out. The holy place, now that's not the holy of holy places. There are two. There's the holy place and the holy of holies. The holy place tent kept out everyone except for priests twice a day. And the holy of holies kept out everyone except the high priest once a year. So it's really cutting people out, not welcoming them in. God designed a covenant box where his presence would dwell. And this is an artist's picture of what that might look like. You can see the glory of God is between these two angels called cherubim. The covenant box was kept in the inner tent, the Holy of Holies. Now, once a year, the high priest would come into the Holy of Holies. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, he burned incense to cover the presence of God. Listen to what it says. The high priest is to put the incense on the fire. Incense is powder that burns, makes smoke, on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud of incense will cover the covenant box that is over the testimony, or else he will die. So that covenant box, the presence of God is there, and if the priest sees the glory of God, the presence, holy presence of God, he'll die. And so he needs the smoke to cover it. Like at Passover, every Hebrew was sinful and deserved to die. And remember, it wasn't the worthiness that saved the Hebrews from death. It was the blood of the Lamb. So everyone should die. So God required that they would sacrifice an animal to symbolically show that they themselves should die. So the sacrifice of the animal doesn't really take away their sin. It symbolically shows, yes, I deserve to die because God's holiness is dwelling in our camp, and I'm definitely not holy. Every family had to offer sacrifices to symbolize the fact that they should die because of their sin. Every priest had to offer a sacrifice to symbolize that they should die when they entered the outer tent. So everybody had to sacrifice because everybody was a son and daughter of Adam and Eve. But how could God's presence dwell among such a sinful people? Remember, holiness is dangerous. Once a year, the high priest had symbolically to purify the most holy place with sacrifices. So this is a regular thing every year. They would sacrifice in order to cleanse the holy place. He will purify, the high priest, will purify the most holy place in this way for all their sin because of the Israelites' impurities and rebellious acts. The high priest, he will do the same for the tent of meeting that remains among them, because it is surrounded by their impurities. So the high priest had to bring sacrifices to cleanse the Holy of Holies, and the holy place, and the altar, and the whole tent of meeting. So God's presence was with the Hebrews, but that presence was utterly holy. God's presence dwelled in the Holy of Holies over the covenant box. But the Hebrews were not worthy of God's presence, being completely sinful people who deserved to die. So here we have God's holy presence, and they're not allowed to enter it. Instead of the Hebrews dying, God allowed them to sacrifice animals to remind them of their sinfulness. And of course, as a picture of Christ. So here's this plan for the tent of meeting. It's kind of simple. It's separated from all the people by curtains because the tent of meeting was a holy place. The tent of meeting is forbidden. It's limited. Only priests and Levites could enter the tent of meeting. It's forbidden. Sacrifice is required. Even the priests could not enter the holy place without first bringing a sacrifice. It's forbidden. Washing. The priest could not enter the holy place without washing the stain of the blood sacrifice from his hands. It's forbidden. Closed. Only certain priests could enter the holy place, and only twice a day. It's forbidden. Forbidden. The most holy place could only be entered once a year and only by the high priest. It's forbidden. Defiled. Israel's sinfulness defiled the most holy place, and it needed sacrifices to purify it symbolically. So what do I learn about this presence of God in the tent of meeting? It's forbidden. I can't enter it. I can't. It's just like before. Nothing in the Hebrews' religion made them clean enough to enter God's presence. Nothing made them clean enough. Not even the sacrifices. Even if a high priest made a sacrifice, if he entered the most holy place and looked upon the presence of God on the covenant box, he would die. The sacrifice is not enough to make him holy. Sacrifices did not make him truly clean, but only symbolically clean. Not even Moses could stand in God's presence and live. So God's salvation story is about God's plan to bring humanity back into his presence, because the entry into the Garden of Eden has been forbidden. But now we've seen that the entry into God's presence, even in the tent of meeting, it's also forbidden. We can't enter into God's presence there either. We have seen that God's presence came to his people as they journeyed to the place which God had promised. We've seen that. But we've also seen that God's presence is forbidden. However, we now see that presence and place are not enough. It's not enough to have God's presence with us. It's not enough to have a place to worship God like the temple or like the tent of meeting. We need something more. We need Eve's seed to come and crush our slave master, Satan. We can't enter into God's presence until Jesus Christ came to crush Satan. We need Noah's seed, who is Jesus Christ, to give us rest. We need Abraham's seed to bless all the families of the earth. We need Jacob's seed to be our Passover sacrifice. We need Israel's seed to open the way into the presence of God until Jesus Christ opens the way into the presence of God, and that curtain is torn from the top of the temple all the way to the ground to open the way into the most holy place. Until that happens, we cannot truly enter God's presence. So strangely, even though this is about God's presence coming to Israel, it's still a forbidden presence. So have to stay tuned. There will be other postings on YouTube that you'll be able to follow this more. And if you have any questions, just ask. God bless.